Hi, my name is Michaela Hediger, and today we're going to be dissecting the upper respiratory tract on a fetal pig. Okay, so we're going to start with the larynx. This is your larynx right here. Larynx, that's also known as your voice box. And inside the larynx, you have your vocal cords. This is also the opening. At the end of the larynx, that's also the opening to the windpipe. So larynx. Okay, from the larynx, we're going to move into the trachea. Right here, trachea. This is also known as the windpipe. And the trachea is made up of 16 to 20 C-shape cartilage rings right here. And you can kind of see those little coiled looking pipe ring structures. That's the windpipe. 16 to 20 C-shaped rings. Okay. And you've got your esophagus, which sits behind the windpipe. And then it drops into the trachea, branches into two bronchi. Down here, I'll see if I can find one. Here's a little tube right there. You see that opening? Little tube. Let's see if I can, right there. Okay. So the trachea branches into two bronchi, and then each bronchus leads to a lung. And the left lung contains 3 lobes, and the right lung contains 4. So I'll show you those lobes. If you look in here, here's a lobe. Got a lobe here, kind of like flap-like. There's another one. There's a lobe. Here's a lung lobe. There's one. And there's one as well. There's the lobes of the lungs. The lungs rest on the diaphragm. Also, to back up here to the windpipe, we have an epiglottis. It's a flap of tissue. And when we swallow, the larynx moves up, and the epiglottis is going to meet the larynx and move down, and it's going to close off our airway so that when we swallow, it doesn't enter into the airway. It goes into the esophagus instead. So that's the job of that epiglottis flap. Okay. And then our diaphragm sits right here below the lungs, separates the respiratory cavity from the abdominal cavity. The diaphragm. And the diaphragm, when you inhale, the diaphragm is going to contract and it's going to flatten, and the chest cavity enlarges, and this contraction creates a vacuum and it pulls air into the lungs. And then upon exhalation, the diaphragm will then relax and return to its dome-like shape as air is forced out. So that diaphragm's a muscle that kind of works too for inhalation and exhalation. It works with the lungs to bring the air in and out of those lungs. Okay, let's see. We've got the heart. Didn't remove that, just left that in there. Heart, lungs. Again, there's 3 lobes in the left, and the right contains 4. Diaphragm, larynx, voice box, vocal cords, windpipe, or the trachea, esophagus, epiglottis separating the windpipe off from the esophagus. Okay, and then again your bronchus and bronchioles. There's that little tube right there. And also, while we're talking about the bronchi and the bronchioles, typically you'll see that objects tend to get stuck more in the right bronchus versus the left. Like a foreign object, it'll get stuck more in the right versus the left. Okay, and that concludes our dissection today of the respiratory tract.